Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the beginning of the Civil War. Now, in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to review material from our previous two lessons. One lesson was a very short one dealing with secession. The other lesson was one dealing with Stephen Douglas, Abraham Lincoln, and Dred Scott, and the eventual election of Lincoln to the presidency. So we're going to start off, we're going to review that material, and then we're going to add some information to it and take us all the way up to the beginning of the Civil War. Now, there is a worksheet of notes that goes along with this to help you keep track of everything we're talking about. I highly encourage you to fill that out as we work through these. If you are on the hybrid plan, you do not have to do this lesson on your own. We are going to do this lesson together in class either on Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so if you're on the hybrid plan, we're going to be doing this lesson together in class. All right, so let's review what we've talked about so far. We're going to start with the term secession. What is secession? Remember, secession is leaving the Union. The formal definition is it is the formal withdrawal of states from the Union. Okay? And remember, the southern states are operating on two principles. Number one, nullification. If the federal government, namely the president or Congress, does something that they don't agree with, that they don't like, they can simply refuse to do it. They can ignore it. Okay? And if that action is questioned or what they are being asked to do is of a nature that it's completely unreasonable that they follow it, they can simply leave the Union. Okay? They can secede. And the reason they think they can do that is they freely join the Union so they can freely leave the Union. So when we talk about secession, this formal withdrawal of states from the Union, keep those two things in the back of your mind, that the South believes it can nullify things that the federal government passes, and that if things get so bad, they can just simply leave because they freely join so they can freely leave. Now, what makes them distrust this man, Abraham Lincoln, so much? We talked about that in our first lesson this week. Why do they distrust Lincoln? Well, remember, he's a Republican. Not that that matters at this point in time, but he's a Republican. He's also anti-slavery. And in their mind, anti-slavery equates to abolitionism. So they think Lincoln is going to abolish and get rid of slavery. All right. And that is not the case. All right. In his Senate run in 1858 and then again in 1860 when he ran for the presidency, he makes it clear he doesn't want to see slavery spread. He doesn't like slavery. He would like it to go away, but he doesn't want to see it spread. That's all he thinks he can do constitutionally. All right. But he did make that speech in 1858, and this is why the South fears he's an abolitionist. He did make that speech in 1858 where he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. We cannot continue to be half free and half slave." So in Southern states' minds, in the back of their minds, okay, he's an anti-slavery candidate, even though he is not expressly stating abolitionism. Okay, they equate anti-slavery with abolitionism, and he's made this speech where he says we can't continue to be half free and half slave. In fact, that's what worries them about him being an abolitionist, is this idea. He says the nation cannot continue to be half free and half slave. Either it's got to be all of one or all the other. And they already know he's an anti-slavery man. So that must mean he's going to get rid of slavery, even though so far all he's saying is I just want to stop it from spreading. Okay, so that's why they distrust Lincoln. He's anti-slavery, which they equate to abolitionism, and he's made this speech, "House divided against itself cannot stand." How did the South justify leaving the Union? They had freely entered the Union, and they could freely leave if they wanted. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. That is what is justifying all of what is going to occur in the next couple years. Okay, they freely left, they freely joined, so they could freely leave. Now, what is the cause of Southern secession? The election of Abraham Lincoln. When Abraham Lincoln gets elected, this is what's going to set us on the path to disunion and set us on the path to civil war. Now, that's where we got in the first couple of lessons. Okay, that's a good review of the first couple of lessons. Now, let's pick up and continue the story and add some more details to it. All right, so Lincoln gets elected in 1860. Okay, that's the big event in 1860. Lincoln is elected 16th president of the United States. When he becomes 16th president of the United States, South Carolina seceded in December 1860. Okay, so the big event was Lincoln's election. He becomes 16th president of the United States. And then South Carolina secedes in December 1860, just a month later. Okay. When South Carolina secedes, 6 other southern states are going to follow them. Okay. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. If you're following along on the worksheet, okay, shade in those 7 deep South states. And I know it says to have a key, but to be honest with you, you don't need to worry about it. Just shade in those 7 deep South states, okay? Here's South Carolina, here's Georgia, Florida, here's Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. Okay, these are our 7 deep South states. They are the first to secede. Okay, now our next big event, well, before we get to that, all right, when those states secede, they form a new nation, the Confederate States of America. And they chose Jefferson Davis from Mississippi as their president. And their first capital was actually going to be in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, it will later move to Richmond, but the first capital was going to be in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, Davis was a pretty good choice for the Confederate States because he had military experience and he had political experience. He fought in the Mexican-American War. I believe he'd been senator from Mississippi. He might have even been governor of Mississippi at one point in time. He served in a presidential cabinet. He was Secretary of War in that presidential cabinet. So he has political experience and military experience. So at face value, he's a good choice for the Confederate States. Now, we're going to talk about him a little later when we get to the people of the war. And he's going to have some significant flaws in his leadership ability, and we'll get to those later when we talk about people of the Civil War. But for right now, at face value, Davis looks like a good choice, military experience and political experience as well. Now, our next big event is Fort Sumter in April 1861. And the big question is, when did the Civil War officially begin? April 1861 at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Now, when we talked about the American Revolution, we talked about the fact that their opening shots of the American Revolution were at Lexington and Concord. But the first official battle isn't until the Battle of Bunker Hill. Well, the same thing happens in the Civil War. The opening shots, the beginning of the war, is here at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The first official battle does not come until the Battle of Bull Run or Manassas, which is in the summer of 1861. Okay, so and I will try on quizzes and tests to give you guys a heads up. Am I asking about the opening shots, the first confrontation, or the first official battle, so that you don't get confused? Okay, so the Civil War began April 1861 at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Now, here's what happens at Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is a Union fort. It belongs to the United States, but it's off the coast of South Carolina, and South Carolina has seceded. So South Carolina thinks that fort is their property because it's off of their coast. And of course, the United States government says, no, it's not. All right. Lincoln is in a very, very precarious position. He does not want to be the aggressor. So one option he has is sending a bunch of reinforcements, a bunch of troops and a bunch of ammunition and battleships and cannon and stuff like that down to Fort Sumter and arming the fort and beginning this standoff with the South, okay? But he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to be the aggressor. He also does not really want to do option number 2, which is just simply let the fort fall, okay? He doesn't want to seem, nobody wants to appear weak, and he doesn't want to just let the fort fall to the Confederacy. The third option, and this was actually the option he goes with, and it was actually scheduled on the books, the fort needs to be resupplied. It's running out of food, it needs medicine, needs blankets. Yes, it probably needs some ammunition, but no more new troops, okay? And it was a regularly scheduled supply shipment. So Lincoln said, I'm just going to resupply the fort, all right? I'm not sending any more troops in. I'm not sending any more weapons necessarily down there, okay? I'm not going to send any ships or anything like that. I'm just sending in supplies. Certainly South Carolina could not object to that, okay? Well, when South Carolina sees the ships coming, they begin to open fire, okay? And they are the aggressor, all right? The Confederate States of America begin the Civil War by opening fire on Fort Sumter, okay? which might have been Lincoln's plan all along. There's a debate on that. All right. So the fort ends up falling, okay, to the Confederacy. Okay, it is a clear Confederate victory. Lincoln is not the aggressor. He did not start this. He just sent resupply ships down. But the fort falls to the Confederates. Now, as the result, Lincoln insists that the Union be held together by force. And he begins to call up troops to put down this rebellion. When he begins to call up troops to put down this rebellion, the upper southern states secede. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Okay, they're going to secede because they see his act of calling up troops as a declaration of war. Okay, in fact, they see his act as an act of rebellion. So they're going to secede. So now the Confederate states look like this. All right, and you can go on and shade in these 4 upper southern states as well. Here's Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Okay, so that brings up the total of Confederate states to 11. All right. Now, opening confrontation of the war is Fort Sumter. The opening shots, Fort Sumter. Not the official battle, though. The first official battle is going to be the Battle of Bull Run or the Battle of Manassas. Okay. Bull Run is located in Manassas, Virginia. Manassas right outside of Washington, D.C. We're going to talk more about this when we get to the battles, but the different sides have different names for a couple of the battles. For example, the South will call this the Battle of Manassas because Manassas is the closest town. The North will call this the Battle of Bull Run because Bull Run is the closest natural feature. It's a creek, okay, that runs close to Manassas. You're going to see the same thing with the Battle of Antietam later on. The North will call it the Battle of Antietam because Antietam's the creek nearby. The South will call it the Battle of Sharpsburg because Sharpsburg's the town that's nearby, okay? So if we're talking about the Battle of Bull Run or the Battle of Manassas, we're talking about the same place, okay? Now, early on, the battle was being won by the Union forces. And remember, the Union forces are the North, the Union forces are the United States, okay? As opposed to the Confederate forces, which are the South and the Confederate States of America. Okay, so the early fighting is won by the Union forces. In fact, it looks like the Union is going to take the battle. And what ends up happening at this battle is all these civilians from Washington, D.C. had come out to see what they thought was going to be the first and last great battle of the American Civil War. Both sides went into this battle very, very confident. Both sides thought we're going to win and we're going to totally demolish the enemy. So you had all these civilians from Washington, D.C. coming out in their carriages. They brought picnic lunches and things like that to watch this first and last great battle of the American Civil War. Okay? So you got all these civilians out there, and it looks like the Union is going to win. And then this guy shows up. His name is Thomas Jonathan Jackson. He is from Virginia. He's actually from the Virginia Military Institute. That's where he was originally from. Okay, he shows up with a detachment of Confederate troops and makes a stand. Okay, he places his troops, and all around him, all these other Confederate forces are retreating, and he places his troops right there in the battle, and they make a stand. Okay, and from this action, he kind of rallies the rest of the Confederates, and the Confederates began to fight back. And there was another Confederate commander, a man by the name of General Bernard B. And he looked at Jackson. He saw Jackson there standing, riding on his horse during the battle, being calm, placing his troops, directing fire, and things like that. And he says, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." Okay? And he's going to get this nickname, Stonewall Jackson. Now, we don't know, a little history trivia there. We don't know if General B was being complimentary of Jackson or making fun of him. Okay. And the reason we don't know is because after Bernard B said this, he gets shot in the mouth and dies. Okay. And we don't know if he was being complimentary, like, there stands Jackson. And in fact, some people say rally behind the Virginians, like, he's making a stand. We can do this too. Or if it was kind of a derogatory thing, like, there stands Jackson like a stone wall. Can't you see everybody else is retreating? You need to get away too. All right. So we don't know if he's being complimentary or making fun of Jackson, but the nickname stands. And for the rest of the war, Thomas Jonathan Jackson is going to be known as Stonewall Jackson. Now, this is a monument of Stonewall Jackson and his horse, Little Sorrel, at Manassas. And I like to refer to this statue as Jackson on steroids because Jackson was never that ripped in real life. Okay, neither was Little Sorrel. And if you ever go to VMI, to the Virginia Military Institute, and you go into their museum, you can see the stuffed carcass of Little Sorrel, and you can tell Little Sorrel is never that ripped either. Right? Now, when Jackson shows up, all right, the South begins to win the battle. The Confederacy begins to win the battle, and they force the North to retreat back to Washington. And it is complete chaos because all those civilians that came out to watch the battle, they're trying to get away too now, and the roads become clogged, and you have these retreating soldiers, and it's a disorderly retreat. So there's all this chaos and confusion, and they get mixed up with all these buggies and wagons and stuff like that. And it's just a terrible, terrible mess trying to get back into DC. Now, the message that this battle sends, okay, from the South is that the South intends to fight for a long haul, okay? To be honest with you, that is the message that both sides receive, and that is the message that both sides send. This is not going to be a quick, easy war. This is not going to be a one-and-done war with one battle and a victor the next day. Both sides are in it for the long haul, okay? The South is in it, but the North is in it as well. Okay, that's the lesson that we learn from the Battle of First Manassas here. This is not going to be an easy war. Both sides are in it for the long haul. Now, that's the beginning of the war. The last two lessons this week are going to get into the early years of the war itself. We're going to talk about some more battles. We're going to talk about strategy for both sides. We're going to talk about some leadership on both sides, things like that. So the last two lessons this week are going to deal with the first few years of the war and the course of the war up until 1862.